Assalamu'alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Introduce us from 7th Group Advanced Microeconomics courses in Class U19, Economic Education Study Program, Faculty of Economics, Yogyakarta State University. We will discuss a topic of market factors. Our group consists of Aglis, Vara, Pranidhana with number of students 14, Anisa Eka Putri with number of students 21, Verawati with number of students 26, and Sarifatun Khasanah with number of students 34.
First of all, we must know about what is factor market definition. Factor market in economics is defined as the overall supply and demand for production factor contained in a particular region. Next, we will know about marginal revenue product competitive and monopolistic output market. Marginal revenue product is the change in sales result as a result of increased production resulting from an increase in the workforce use. Formula of MRP is change of revenue divided by change of labor. Is obtained from the original formula, namely marginal product times marginal revenue. The marginal product formula is change of quantity divided by change of labor, while the marginal revenue formula is change of revenue divided by change of quantity. Marginal revenue product curve of monopolistic market and competitive market. This is the picture. Marginal revenue product of monopolistic is lower than marginal revenue product of competitive market. The curve of MRP2 depicts the MRP curve in a monopolistic market. The curve of sale of marginal production in a competitive market always lies to the right of the MRP curve of the monopolistic market. This occurs because in a competitive market, the company will sell all output at market price P. As a result, the marginal income from selling additional units of output is equal to P. Then, MRP formulas is marginal product times marginal revenue. If marginal revenue equal to P, then it becomes marginal product times price. Whereas in a monopolistic market, at the higher level of labor use, the price of goods become cheaper. This price reduction is intended to sell more. As a result, marginal income is always less than price. Then, marginal revenue product formula equal marginal product times marginal revenue. Here, marginal revenue is lower than price. It is clear that the marginal revenue product is smaller than the marginal revenue product of competitive market. Next, backward bending supply of labor. Labor supply is the amount of labor that can be provided by the owner of the workforce at each possible wage within a certain period of time. And this is the curve. At a certain wage level, the provision of individual work time will increase if the wage is paying or from W to W1. After reaching a certain wage, W1, the increase in wage actually reduces the time provided by individual for work, or from W1 to Wn. This is because individuals choose to enjoy more free time and work less. This is called backward bending supply curve. Layard and Walters, 1978, stated individual decisions to increase or decrease leisure time are influenced by the level of wages and non-work income. Meanwhile, the level of productivity always changes according to the production pace, with a pattern of rising first to a peak then decreasing. The greater the elasticity, the greater the role of labor input to produce output, meaning the smaller the amount of labor demanded. Meanwhile, to describe the pattern of combination of production factors that are not comparable or variable proportions, isoquantities curve is generally used, namely curves that describe various combination of production factor or labor and capital that produce the same volume of production. Isoquant slopes represent the marginal rate of technical substitution, or known as MRS. This is intended to see the relationship between the labor factor and capital, which is the slope of the isoquant curve.
Equilibrium in the labor market is stabilized through the interaction of individual labor supply decision with firms' decision about how much labor to hire. At the real wage rate of W, the quantity of labor demanded by firms is precisely matched by the quantity supplied by individuals. A real wage higher than W will create a disequilibrium in which the quantity of labor supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. There will be some involuntary unemployment at such a wage, and this may create pressure for the real wage to fall. Similarly, a real wage lower than W would result in disequilibrium behavior because firms would want to hire more workers than available. In the scramble to hire workers, firms may bid up real wage to restore equilibrium. The next is about economic rent. Economic rent is that portion of resource earning that is not necessary to keep the resource in its present use. Economic rent is producer surplus earned by resource suppliers. The division of earnings between opportunity cost and economic rent depends on the resource owner's elasticity of supply. In general, the less elastic the resource supply, the greater economic rent as a proportion of total earning. For example, a worker may be willing to work for $15 per hour, but because he belongs to an union, she receives $18 per hour for the same job. The difference of $3 is the worker's economic rent, which can also be referred to as an earned income. The next is about land rent. If the supply of research to a particular market is perfectly inelastic, the research has no alternative use, so all earnings are economic rent. Land is an inelastically supplied factor. The supply curve is perfectly inelastic because land for housing or agriculture is fixed, at least in the short run. With land inelastically supplied, its price is determined entirely by demand. The demand for land is given by T1, and its price per unit is S1. Total land rent is given by the green shaded rectangle. But when the demand of land increases to T2, the rental value per unit of land increases to S2. Case, total land rent includes the blue shaded area as well. Thus, an increase in the demand of land, a shift to the right in the demand curve, leads both to a higher price per acre and to a higher economic rent.
That weight loss from monopsony power. The shaded rectangle and triangle show change in buyer and seller surplus when moving from competitive price and quantity PZ and QZ to the monopsony's price and quantity PM and QM. Because both price and quantity are lower, there is an increase in buyer or consumer surplus given by A minus B. Producer surplus falls by A plus C, so there is a deadweight loss given by triangle B and C. Marginal and average expenditure. In a competitive market, or competitive buyer and competitive seller, the buyer achieves the prevailing price of PM. Average expenditure and marginal expenditure are constant and the same. In a monopsony market, a monopsonist can buy goods at a price below the marginal value because the supply or average expenditure curve is shown by an increasing slope. Thus, marginal expenditure is greater than average expenditure. Furthermore, the monopsonists benefit from facing an upward ascending supply curve, so that marginal expenditure exceeds average expenditure. The more inelastic the supply curve, the greater the difference between marginal and average expenditure, and the greater the monopsony power obtained by the buyer. If there is only a buyer in a market, a purely monopsonist, then the strength of the monopsony is determined by the elasticity of market supply. If the supply is highly elastic, then the monopsony power is small and there is little gain on the buyer side. The competitive buyer faces a price that is fixed and given. The price is constant because the buyer is so small relative to the market that her purchases do not affect the price. Average expenditure and marginal expenditure for this buyer are constant and equal. The buyer will continue purchasing the good until the marginal benefits, defined to be the marginal value, are equal to marginal expenditure, the optimal profit maximizing level of good to purchase. A competitive seller takes the price as fixed and given. The price is constant because the seller is so small relative to the market that his sales do not affect the price. Average revenue and marginal revenue for the seller are constant and equal. The seller will continue producing the good until the marginal benefit, defined to be marginal revenue, are equal to marginal cost, the optimal profit maximizing level of good to produce. A monopsony uses the same decision-making framework, comparing marginal benefit and marginal cost. The distinction is that a monopsony is large enough relative to the market to influence the price. Thus, the monopsony faces an upward sloping supply curve. As the monopsony purchases more of the good, it drives the price up since the firm is large. When it purchases more of a good, it drives the price higher. The average expenditure curve is the supply curve of the good faced by a monopsony. Bargaining power. A monopsony has buying or bargaining power in their market. This buying power means that a monopsony can exploit their bargaining power with a supplier to negotiate lower prices. When there are relatively few suppliers and buyers and the terms of trade are determined by bilateral bargaining. Bargaining power determines the extent to which a buyer is able to extract surplus from a supplier. Differences in bargaining power are reflected in differences in individually negotiated discount. Bargaining power refers to the bargaining strength that a buyer has with respect to its supplier. Both types of buyer power result in lower prices. Thus, the lower price obtained from monopsony power is achieved through the act of purchasing less, whereas the lower price obtained from bargaining power is achieved through the threat of purchasing less. A key difference is that the exercise of monopsony power results in prices being depressed below competitive levels, whereas the exercise of bargaining power might countervail seller market power and push prices toward competitive level.
Now, we will talk about monopoly power of seller of labor. Not only the output market, the factor market also has monopoly rights in the monopoly factor firm. This company is also known as a labor union. The union has the monopoly power, which is to determine the wage rate. As on the curve on the side, the seller can maximize the number of workers hired at L3 by agreeing that workers will work at wage W1. The quantity of labor L1 that maximizes the rent earned by employers is determined by the intersection of the marginal revenue and supply labor curve. Union members will receive a wage rate of W3. Finally, if the union wishes to maximize total wage paid to workers, it should allow L2 union members to be employed at wage rate of W2 at the point the marginal revenue to the union will be zero. The monopoly power of seller of labor can make wage discrimination of unionized and non-unionized sectors. A rent maximizing policy might benefit non-union workers if they can find non-union jobs. However, if these jobs are not available, rent maximization could create too sharp a distinction between winners and losers. An alternative objective is to maximize the aggregate wage that all union members receive. To achieve this goal, the number of workers hired increased from L1 until the marginal revenue to the union is equal to zero. Because any further employment decreases total wage payments, aggregate wage are maximized when the wage is equal to W2 and the number of workers is equal to L2. From the discrimination wage, we can get a curve of wage discrimination. When a monopolistic union raises the wage in the unionist sector of the economy from W star to WU, jobs in that sector falls, as shown by the movement along the demand curve of DU. For the total supply of labor given by SL to remain unchanged, the wage in the non-unionized sector must fall from W star to WRU, as shown by the movement along the demand curve DRU. There are cases in accordance with the material that we discussed this time. In that case, the workers demanded the government increase their minimum wage. However, this can lead to an imbalance between wage and number of workers demanded. Real wage describes the purchasing power of the income or wage that the worker or worker receives. During a pandemic, the level of real wage has decreased due to existing inflation. If in this condition the minimum wage is increased, it will cause an imbalance in the demand and supply of labor. The curve at the top left show the equilibrium point when wages are constant, where the real wage given is W and the amount of labor absorbed is L. When workers demand an increase in the minimum wage that is not accompanied by an increase in real wage, this will cause an imbalance, so that the labor supply will exist at point in S curve, while the demand for labor is at a point on the curve. Based on various existing studies, an increase in the minimum wage will also result in a reduced demand for labor by business sector. Even so, if the UMP is not raised, the labor force will experience great pressure due to the needs they must fulfill. There is our presentation. If there is a shortage, we apologize. Any questions are welcome. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.